So these are our goals for this webinar. We're going to go over the differences between EV3 and Spike Prime. We're going to focus on our first LEGO League teams. And just as a note, all our opinions are our own, and we don't represent FIRST or LEGO Education anyway or what they believe. And some people were asking about next season, and in this webinar, we won't be discussing anything about next season, just so you know. But before we get started, we do have a poll that we'd like you to fill in. So the poll is going to show up in a second. It should have showed up on your screen now. Oh, you should say you can pick them up.
Thank you for completing that poll. We're going to go on to the next slides now. Oh, wait, sorry. There's one more poll. Now we will move on. We're going to begin with the comparison between Spike Prime and the EV3. When you first get the Spike Prime, the most obvious difference is probably that it has a much shorter boot time. It takes only 5 seconds to turn on the Spike Prime in comparison with 30 seconds or even longer for the EV3. This is very convenient for First LEGO League teams because let's say your robot crashes before or during a run. Instead of having to wait 30 seconds and losing all that precious time to reboot your brick, you can quickly recover in 5 seconds. Next, you will notice that there are only 6 ports on the Spike Prime, but 8 on the EV3. However, unlike the EV3, the Spike Prime ports are universal, and which means they can be used for either motor or sensor, whereas the EV3 had 4 distinct sensor and motor ports. It may seem like you're having a significant loss of ports, but one of the major sensors, the gyro sensor, is built into the brick, so you do not have to waste a port with the gyro sensor like you would have to with the EV3. Therefore, you are not at a major loss by switching to the Spike Prime in terms of ports.
Next, we're going to go over the differences in the sensors for Spike Prime versus the EV3. First is the color sensor, which has been improved since the EV3. It now can detect more colors than before, and since it shines a white light instead of a red light, it is also better at detecting the darkness or lightness of a surface in reflected light mode. The distance sensor is pretty similar to the ultrasonic sensor in the EV3. We found that when it's close up to a surface, it doesn't work too well at angles, but as it gets further away, this problem seems to go away. The force sensor is different to the touch sensor in that you can actually tell the amount that it's pressed in, the force in newtons that's being pressed onto the sensor, which allows you to do some more interesting things with how much it's actually pressed in. And the gyro sensor is now a 6-axis gyro sensor, meaning you can get yaw, pitch, and roll. It gives you, and then there's a 3-axis tilt sensor as well as a 3-axis accelerometer, and it's built into the hub itself. Another interesting thing I didn't mention with the distance sensor was that there's a hidden feature where you can actually take off the front and you can add different components and different sensors on, and there's a picture of that on the bottom left, and that adds for some extra functionality. And this wouldn't be useful for first LEGO League per se, but for fun and for other projects and stuff, this is an interesting feature.
There has been a question in the chat: is Spike a software or new hardware or both? It is both. The hardware is called Spike Prime and the software is called that too. Next, we'll be taking a look at with the comparison of the programming languages for Spike and EV3. The default programming language for Spike Prime is a Scratch-based program called Word Blocks. Just of last week, the LEGO Education added in a new text-based Python, MicroPython programming language, which is conveniently built into the same software as the Scratch programming with basic tutorials and examples. The MicroPython has some extra commands and functionality over the Scratch-based environment. On the EV3, you can use the EV3 Lab or EV3G LabVIEW-based, also called EV3G LabVIEW-based system. There's also the new Scratch-based EV3 Classroom, which is currently only on the Mac. LEGO Education did release a text-based MicroPython environment, but this requires an SD card and a completely different software called Visual Studio to program it. This is not nearly as convenient as a built-in MicroPython for the Spike Prime. One advantage of the EV3 is that you can use non-LEGO supported languages such as Java or C++, but these also usually require an SD card and usually require another editor such as Visual Studio Code or something similar.
One thing that I forgot to mention about the sensors, there was a question about if anyone has experienced gyro drift. The gyro sensor actually has no drift in Spike Prime, as well as minimal lag. So that is also a major improvement over the EV3 that's going to be really helpful for teams when programming the gyro sensor.
Sorry. As with the Spike Prime, the text-based languages for the EV3 do tend to provide more functionality than their graphical counterparts. Okay, there we go.
So next up, we're going to be looking at some of the cool features and trade-offs with Spike Prime. So as far as programming goes, all of the programming techniques that you could do with EV3 can also be done in Spike Prime. We've done advanced code such as proportional control, gyro move straight, PID line followers, squaring on a line, and more in both Scratch and Python, MicroPython in Spike Prime. And it's worked just as well as the EV3 has. If you'd like to look at some of our lessons on how to do these in Spike Prime, we have those all on primelessons.org. And if you want to see videos of these techniques in action, you can check out our Facebook page at Prime Lessons. And this kind of shows that capability-wise, Spike Prime is just as good as EV3. It can do all of those advanced techniques.
There have been significant improvements with the Spike Prime. We will first take a look at the software side of things. When using the EV3, many FLL teams often had difficulty finding their programs in the long list of programs on the built-in EV3 brick interface. However, with the Spike Prime, it is very convenient because you can assign an ID, a slot per program, and then they nicely show up sequentially. This is very convenient, sequentially from 0 to 19. So in essence, you have 20 projects. This is very convenient for first Lego League teams because you can easily order your projects by what run number it is, and then when you go to your table, it will show up in that order. While the Spike Prime does not have a full screen as the EV3 does, you can still easily debug data using the variables monitor, where, for example, you can, if you want to debug the value of something that is going wrong in your code, you can easily write data to a variable, and when your Spike Prime is connected to a computer, it shows up right there in the right hand of your screen in the variables monitor. With the EV3 also, if you were to program on a Chromebook, Android, or iPad, you were forced to use a limited version of the desktop software. But on the Spike Prime, it is the same software across all platforms, which makes it very easy. For example, if one team member is using a Chromebook or another a Windows computer, you can easily transfer programs without any loss of data. Another improvement with the software is that movement blocks can take centimeters or inches as an input, in addition to the traditional degrees, rotations, and seconds, which makes programming your robot to navigate the field a lot more convenient and easier for beginner teams. Whereas in the past, to accomplish the same effect, you would have to create a custom My block. The motors all have built-in stall detection, unlike the EV3 where you would have to create a My block to do this, which makes it a lot easier for first Lego League teams to program motor arms, etc.
Next, we're going to take a look at the hardware side improvements with Spike Prime. The most obvious difference is the smaller form factor that you get with Spike Prime, allowing you to make smaller robots and builds. The motors and sensors in brick have a more rectangular shape and have more connection points, which makes it much easier to build with Spike Prime. The wires are also much thinner than EV3, and they give you wire clips in the kit, which makes it really easy to manage your wires in your builds. There's also built-in absolute positioning in all of the motors, and this is helpful because when, like if let's say you want an arm to go to a certain place every time, it will do that. There's actually a marking on the motor itself telling where 0 position is. So you can always go to the same position no matter what, and it's absolute. The battery can now be charged through USB, which is much nicer. And it even charges if you're programming over USB, it's charging as you're doing that. The gyro sensor, as we mentioned earlier, does not have any drift and no significant lag at all, and it's much easier to use than before. And the color sensor, I also mentioned that earlier, is now improved with better reflected light readings and more colors that can be detected. And we hope that with these improvements to these sensors, that more teams will be more comfortable with using sensors with Spike Prime.
Someone asked, does the software work well with Chromebooks? We do not own a Chromebook ourselves, but it is the same interface, so we imagine that it would function similarly to the desktop software.
Okay, so the cost for the new kits, the base kit is $329. That's approximately $100 less than the EV3 base kit. And the expansion set is $99. This is in US dollars. And that is basically the same price as the expansion set for EV3, but we're going to be discussing later on how the expansion set for Spike Prime actually gives you a lot more than the EV3 set did.
Also,
can you see which, there's another question, can you see which block is running like the EV3? I believe that it highlights which like stack of code that you're running, but not specifically like one block.
however, if you can accomplish the same effect by writing to using the variables monitor and write to a variable at each point where you want to debug. For example, you can write to a variable after a move block, and then you know when it's written there that your code has completed that block. Also, someone asked, can you also charge with the regular outlet, or is it USB only? The charging is USB only, but it's the same method as with the phone charger. You can have a USB to wall socket adapter and plug it in, and it will charge. You do not need a computer to charge it. Okay, yes. That seems it. Okay. With all these improvements, there are a few trade-offs. One of the major trade-offs involve my blocks. The my blocks in Spike Prime are only available for use in the project that you created the my block in. This means if you were to create a my block in one project called Project 1, you cannot go to Project 2 and then go to the my blocks tab and use that same my block. However, it is quite simple to copy and paste a my block from one project to another. And unlike EV3, it will copy all its dependencies. It will copy the my block with it, so it's a lot easier to copy my block between projects. Another workaround is to create all your programs in the same project, as in write all of your runs in one project and then use different stacks to run them. There are no outputs from my blocks, but you can work around this using variables. For example, you just take the output and write it to a variable, and then subsequently you take that variable and use it in your code. Note that these are issues specific to the Scratch environment and also issues with EV3 Classroom. In MicroPython, these are not issues, and you can import functions and have outputs.
So the question about can you do commenting in Spike Prime programs? The answer to that is yes, you can comment. I think you just right-click on the block, and then you can click comment, and then there's like a text box that shows on the side where you can type in, and it will have like a line to the block that you're referring to.
We do have a lesson on the commenting on our website, primelessons.org.
Okay, so there's another question about what is gyro drift. So gyro drift is when it's when the gyro values, even when your robot is still, the gyro values will keep increasing, and this is because when the sensor was calibrated, the gyro sensor was moving, so that's what it thinks is still. So then it will keep moving. So teams that were using the EV3 would have to keep their robot still when it turned on, because that's when it calibrated the gyro. And if they didn't do that, the gyro values would drift off, and they would have to run a special piece of code, it's calibration code, that you could run as a program that would force the sensor to recalibrate itself. But no, that's no longer a problem with the Spike Prime, so you won't have to do any of that. Okay, so let's take a look at some more trade-offs. So one thing about the gyro is you can't access the rate or accelerometer readings in the Scratch version of the software, but you can do this in MicroPython. The distance sensor, as I mentioned earlier, does not work too well at angles when it's close to a surface. But if you're facing straight on to your target, or if it's far enough away, this isn't much of a problem. There also isn't a color sensor calibration that's built into the software. You can work around this by creating code. And this, as far as we've tested, the sensor seems to work well without calibration. We've run into no issues with not having a color sensor calibration. You also can't read and write files in Spike Prime, but you in the Scratch software, but you can do this in MicroPython. The battery, while it is a USB charging, it has to be in the hub. It has to be connected to the hub to charge. So you can't have batteries off to the side charging and like replace them unless you have more than one Spike Prime hub. Also, there are fixed wire lengths because the wires are attached to the electrical components themselves. However, for first LEGO League, the wire length is sufficient. From the robots that we've built, we haven't really needed wires longer than what they give. And if the wires are too long, they're very thin and easy to fit into places and manage.
And they give you wire clips that you can easily use. Next, we will be.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about some common misconceptions about Spike Prime. Before we do that, we have 2 polls that we'd like you to complete. And we'll show you the results from the last one as well.
We have a question. If you can't access the gyro rate in Scratch, does that mean if something goes wrong, it is harder to debug? Or does the improved gyro make it unlikely to be needed anyway? The gyro rate does not make it harder to debug it anyway. Because it just means you cannot access the degrees per second value. You can still access the degrees value normally.
You can see the gyro rate and acceleration in like the port view. It's just that you can't like read it in a block. So you can still see the gyro rate. Like if you wanted to see what the rate was, you can like it's on your computer in the software. Yep. So there's another poll that just showed up.
Okay, here are the results for our poll. So for our first question, most people said Spike Prime is for age 10.
So yeah, looks like most people think it's for a younger age group. Probably like 9 to 12 is where most people said was the age range.
There were a few people who thought that robot game scores would be lower than those for the EV3. We will be addressing these concerns shortly.
Most people believe that Spike Prime motors were less powerful.
No, they are not.
Oh, that are not less powerful than the EV3 counterparts?
However, there were a few who thought they were less powerful. Most people thought the programming environment is not more limited than the EV3s. However, there is a sizable minority who thought it is more limited. Again, we will be addressing these concerns shortly.
We have a question: is Spike Prime compatible with Chromebooks and iPad? And how about Macs? Yes, it works on all of those platforms.
Okay, we're going to move on now to address common misconceptions. First off, it is commonly perceived that Spike Prime is only for beginners and primary school students, and that it is simply a stepping stone towards the EV3, which is for secondary school students.
Which is also shown in the poll as well.
Yes. Even though the default software is Scratch and the target and the colors may appeal more to a younger audience, the capabilities of Spike Prime match those of the EV3. And if that's not challenging enough for an older student, you can use MicroPython to further your knowledge and experience a text-based programming language.
So the Spike Prime motors, some people believe that Spike Prime motors are less powerful and therefore worse for first LEGO League. It is true that they are less powerful than the EV3 motors. However, there really is no need for more power in first LEGO League than what the Spike Prime motors give you. And if you need more torque to lift something heavy, increasing the gear ratio is sufficient and teaches you other skills as well. So I think that the motors that they give you have sufficient power for anything that you need to do in first LEGO League.
Some people believe that Spike Prime is less accurate and therefore less reliable than the EV3. However, in some ways, Spike Prime can be even more reliable. For example, Spike Prime has a built-in stall detection feature and improved sensors such as a gyro sensor with no drift, which in essence make it even a little more reliable than the EV3. Also, all reliability techniques that all of you probably use with the EV3 can still be done with the Spike Prime. And regarding accuracy, the Spike Prime motors are comparable with the EV3 motors. Anything to add, Arvind?
No, that's good. So people say that there are few resources for Spike Prime, and which means it has less support and shouldn't be used for first LEGO League. However, our site, primelessons.org, is working towards getting a complete set of lessons from beginner to advanced to support people using Spike Prime. We will support all teams that decide to use Spike Prime. There's also an online community that you can ask for help. FLL Share and Learn and the LEGO Spike community will always help you if you have any questions, just ask. And those are on Facebook. There's also new resources coming out every week for Spike Prime and improving them. And there's also built-in resources in the software as well to help you out.
There has been a question. You can't use a combination of Spike and EV3 motors, correct? No, you cannot combine the motors, and the sensors too, for that matter. Then another question was, can you mix and match Spike kit and EV3 kit for robot building? Yes, of course you can use Lego Technic and normal Lego components just as you would with an EV3. However, again, you cannot mix and match the electrical components.
We even built a hybrid robot that uses like the EV3 with the Spike Prime parts and the wheels, the new wheels and stuff like that. Yeah, so the sensors and the electrical components have a new, they have a new connector, so they won't be compatible with the EV3 because of that, since they have different wires. Okay, so let's move on.
Can a team use Scratch-based and MicroPython programming on the same robot? Yes, you can. You can assign each type of program to different slots. So yes, in theory, you could have your first run be in Scratch and your second run be in MicroPython. But I expect I expect a lot of teams will go with one or the other so that they can use same my blocks, for example. Okay. Oops, sorry. Some people think that Spike Prime is actually more expensive than the EV3, but in reality, the Spike Prime is cheaper than the EV3 by roughly $100 US. Also, the expansion set gives gives you motors and sensors unlike the EV3's expansion set, which is a way better value compared to its EV3 counterpart.
So people also say that Spike Prime will have bugs in it since it's a new product. Spike Prime is new, and there are updates coming out all the time to fix these bugs, and so you should install the updates whenever they come out. Also, when the EV3 first came out, it also had bugs, and Lego has historically addressed these bugs very quickly and had updates for them, and only some bugs were left uncovered and addressed only after several years later. And the community usually develops workarounds for these sort of things too. So I don't think that bugs in the software will have much impact. So overall conclusion, if you have EV3s or just bought your EV3s, that's not a big deal. EV3 is still a great product, and First has always supported multiple platforms, so I'm sure it'll still be legal for First Lego League. And the competitions are usually not geared to a specific platform, so using your EV3 is not going to put you at a disadvantage or at an advantage to Spike Prime. But if you do have the budget, or if you're just starting out, regardless of what the age of the students might be, you can give Spike Prime a try, and you shouldn't underestimate the capabilities of Spike Prime. And I truly believe that they match that of the EV3. Well, thank you for listening. Do you have any questions?
We have a few more questions in the chat. Can you use the new motors from Technic set, like Top Gear rally cars? They have the same plugs. Yes, these are all the same power functions connectors. I do not know if you can. I do not know if you can program them, and I do not think they will be legal for First Lego League because they are not the Spike Prime motors. You said you could copy my blocks. Can those be copies from scratch to MicroPython or converted to MicroPython? There is no easy way in the software to convert between Scratch and MicroPython. However, there are workarounds that you can do. You can just write the same my block in MicroPython and Scratch and copy that between programs.
Is there anywhere to find good descriptions of the coding blocks besides the help menu in Lego Scratch? Not really. I think that's where they have all the descriptions of the blocks. If you want lessons on how to use them, then we have those in primelessons.org. But as far as descriptions of the blocks themselves go, that's you can only find those in the help menu. Will EV3 be discontinued? I don't think so. I think just like the NXT is still going to be supported for a few more years.
We don't know.
We don't really know.
Do you think we need to transition teams to using EV3 to Classroom Scratch instead of the Mindstorm software? That is entirely up to you. If you are using the latest version of macOS, you are forced to use the Classroom because the EV3G LabVIEW based one is not available on the latest version of macOS. But Classroom is not currently available on Windows computers. For a newbie to Spike, better to start with Scratch or MicroPython. That is entirely up to you. It depends on if you have a background in Scratch or MicroPython already. If you are a newbie to programming entirely, Scratch is probably a better place to start. Is data logging as an EV3 education version available? There is no data logging program feature as there was in the EV3 software. However, you can still use data logging features by replicating these in a program.
Wait, are you asking like, is there data logging in Spike Prime, or is that saying is there
Yes, and
in the EV3 education version is there data logging?
I think he's trying to ask if there's a
Oh,
data
it's
logging
similar
in
to
Spike
Spike
Prime
Prime.
similar
Okay.
to EV3 education. Do you think we need to transition? We already addressed that.
This one, you want me to say that one?
Oh yeah, sure. How much more improved do you find the line follow mechanism in Spike versus EV3? I would say they're very similar. The color sensor in Spike Prime is a bit better than the EV3's color sensor in terms of color recognition.
Here's a question further up. Since EV3G and Spike Prime software both Scratch-based, can you use one software for both, e.g. program Spike Prime and EV3G?
There is no way currently to copy code from a EV3 Scratch program and a Spike Scratch program. We will just have to wait and see what happens with that, but currently there is no mechanism to do that. Is Spike better for rookie teams? Arvind, do you want to comment on that?
I mean, I think that Spike and EV3 can both be used by rookie teams. If you've already bought EV3s, then Spike is then you can use your EV3s. There's really no problem with that, so you shouldn't worry. But the Spike software is in Scratch, so which goes in along with like curriculum and that kids learn in some schools nowadays. So it might be better to start with Scratch, but you can also do that in EV3 as well. However, it is easier to build and work with the Spike Prime set. So I would say if you have like the budget to get those Spike Prime sets, then go ahead and do that. So, and the sensors are a lot easier to use with Spike Prime as well. And I hope that will take away some of the frustration with sensors that teams had with the EV3.
Why should we spend money to switch to Prime from EV3? I'm not seeing the advantage. I think you mean, I'm assuming you mean from EV3 to Spike Prime. There are some advantages and disadvantages of making the switch. The sensors are better. Arvind, do you want to, as we covered, and the MicroPython is easier to use on the Spike Prime than with the EV3. And the gyro doesn't drift.
The building is a lot easier too, because it is smaller as well as in a more rectangular shape, which makes it easier to build with. So there's a lot of advantages with Spike Prime that will help make it easier. Due to the pandemic and virtual learning we are currently doing, are the hurdles of learning the new software worth going with Spike? I coach a team with beginner EV3 knowledge.
The learning curve for Spike programming is very easy, especially if you're using Scratch. A lot of schools already teach Scratch in their curriculum, so using it with Spike Prime is just a matter of applying it to that. And also, Scratch is a very straightforward programming language and is very easy to pick up.
Is Spike Prime going to be used in all competitions, or are piloting certain regions? We don't know. Last season it was allowed, so I would assume it is next year as well. Do you recommend if you already have EV3 to keep using, but perhaps buy this Spike expansion set to utilize their squares, etc.? Yes, I mean, if you already have gotten the EV3, the EV3 isn't a bad product. It's still great. So I would say if you've gotten the EV3, then go ahead and get some use out of it.
You can buy the Spike expansion set if you have the money to do so, to utilize new parts. The Spike expansion set does come with sensors specific to the Spike Prime itself that you wouldn't be able to use if you had the EV3 core kit and the Spike expansion set.
Yes, Spike Prime and EV3 are allowed in all first leg league competitions. Yes.
Has there been any sense of whether the Spike has as many gyro glitches as the EV3? From our observations, the Spike Prime does not have any drift and minimal lag compared to the EV3, making it overall a better sensor than it was with EV3. Is the brick in the Spike Prime better than the EV3? Does it still have arrow buttons on the brick? Yes, you have two brick buttons that you can program still on the Spike Prime.
And while it doesn't have a screen, you can view all your sensor data by reading them to variables and on the port view screen on the computer software itself. So you aren't really at a disadvantage not having a screen. The screen was also kind of hard to see on the EV3 as well. So I think that having the 5x5 grid doesn't put you at a disadvantage, and you can still put numbers on there and everything that you would want to use the screen for in EV3, like menu systems and stuff like that, can be done on Spike Prime on the 5x5 grid as well.
Someone asked the expansion does not come with a container for the new parts. Does LEGO plan to include one at some point? We do not know. That is something you would have to ask LEGO about. Is there Bluetooth on the Spike? Yes, it does classic Bluetooth and Bluetooth low energy.
Would it be better to keep EV3 than buy Spike after bugs have been fixed, or buy Spike now and use it instead of EV3? I think that the bugs are going away pretty quickly, and there aren't that much of a problem. As far as we've played around with it, it's able to reliably do all sorts of advanced things without issues, such as like line followers and squaring up a line, PID, and stuff like that. So I think that getting Spike Prime now wouldn't hurt you.
During competition, if you don't have a screen, how does the team know what program they are running? Each program has a slot that shows up from 0 to 19 on the brick. So you know exactly which program you're running when you click play on that slot. Also, if you are already in the program, you can control the light matrix programmatically to show whatever you want. So the team can have some sort of indicator after you're running the program of what program is running.
Yeah, there is a screen. It's just a 5x5 grid, so you can still write stuff on it.
For people using the EV3, do you recommend changing to Classroom instead of the old software? That is currently up to you. As we said earlier, the EV3 Classroom is only available on macOS right now. And if you are using the latest version of macOS, your only option is to use the Classroom.
Also, if you plan to switch over to Spike Prime in the future, if you want to get used to using Scratch-based software, then switching to EV3 Classroom might be good, so that there'll be a smoother transition into the Spike Prime.
However, if you are using Windows, you have to use the EV3 Lab software.
Any other questions?
Oh, yes. If you have a mix of EV3 and Spike in your class, perhaps it is better to use EV3 Classroom for a more similar environment. We have converted most of our EV3 Lab lessons to EV3 Classroom, as you can find, and that you can find on ev3lessons.com. Are there any other questions? Has anyone raised hand?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, you're welcome to all of you.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.
I think that if there are no more questions, we can wrap this up. You feel free to email us or contact us any other way to ask any questions you may have. We will share this presentation online for all of you to access. Thank you all for joining.
I have a question. My question is, where can I find the recording? I think we thought it was at 12 o'clock, so we got on late.
We will email it.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, we are going to look into looking into translating Prime lessons. We have already started this process. By the way, our email is team@droidsrobotics.org if you don't see it in the chat. Also, if anyone here wants to volunteer to translate, we would love your assistance doing so and your collaboration.